I packed my things and disappeared after my wife slapped me at her birthday dinner table in front of her friends and family. For years later, I was invited in my hometown for an exclusive meeting of millionaire elites. When I landed, I got the shocking news about my wife that, you know that feeling when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, thinking you're about to jump into something beautiful, only to realize you're falling into your own grave? Yeah, that was me on March 15th, planning what I thought would be the perfect night for Delilah's 36th birthday. I'd been working on this thing for months, man. Not weeks, months. Every single detail had to be flawless because that's what Delilah deserved. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself while I was dropping serious cash on stuff that would probably bankrupt most normal people. The rooftop venue alone cost me $3,000, but it wasn't just any rooftop. This was the penthouse terrace at the Meridian, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the whole city. You could see the river snaking through downtown, all those lights twinkling like diamonds scattered across black velvet. It was the kind of view that made people shut up and just stare, you know? The wine? Don't even get me started on the wine. I flew in cases of this French stuff. Chateau something or other that the wine guy swore was absolutely transcendent. Cost me $400 a bottle, and I bought enough to make sure everyone could get properly buzzed without us running out. I'm talking about the good stuff here, not some cheap grocery store wine that tastes like it was filtered through a gym sock. Then there was the quartet. Real musicians, not some college kids looking to make beer money. These guys had played at symphony halls and fancy weddings for celebrities whose names you'd definitely recognize. They set up in the corner with their instruments gleaming under the string lights I'd had installed specifically for this night. The violinist had this way of making his instrument sing that gave you chills, and when they played Delilah's favorite song, that old jazz number she always hummed in the shower, I swear I almost teared up thinking about how perfect her reaction was going to be. The cake was its own masterpiece. 3 tiers of this fancy Belgian chocolate stuff, custom designed with edible gold leaf, and these sugar flowers that looked so real you'd think someone had just picked them from a garden. The baker, this artsy woman who charged like she was Michelangelo or something, spent weeks getting the details just right. It was supposed to represent Delilah's journey, her love for art, her dreams of traveling, all that stuff she talked about when we'd stay up late planning our future together. I had everything mapped out like a military operation. The guests would arrive at 7, mingle with cocktails while watching the sunset paint the sky all those crazy colors. The quartet would start playing right as the last bit of daylight faded, creating this magical atmosphere that would make everyone feel like they were in some romantic movie. Then we'd move to dinner, catered by that upscale place downtown that always had a waiting list longer than my arm. After that, the cake, the speeches, and hopefully Delilah looking at me like I was the greatest guy who ever lived. But life's got this twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? When the moment came for Delilah to give her thank you speech, I was standing there grinning like an idiot, waiting for her to mention how I'd pulled all this together. She thanked her sister Bianca for always being there. She thanked her mom for raising her right. She thanked her friends for making life worth living. She even thanked the damn waitstaff for their service. But me? The guy who'd been planning this thing since Christmas, who'd stressed over every detail, who'd blown through his savings account to make her dreams come true for one night. Nothing. Not even a glance in my direction. That's when something inside me started to crack. Not break. Just crack, like when you drop a glass, but it doesn't shatter right away, just sits there with these hairline fractures running through it, waiting for the next hit to finish the job. You know what? Delilah said, her voice cutting through the music and conversation like a knife. There's something that's been bothering me all night. She was looking right at me now, but not in the way I'd been hoping for. Her eyes had that cold look I'd seen before, usually right before she was about to tear into someone for disappointing her. The whole vibe here feels off, like someone's trying too hard to impress people instead of just letting things happen naturally. I felt my stomach drop. Everyone was staring now, the conversations dying out one by one as people sensed drama brewing. The quartet kept playing, but it felt weird, like background music for a car crash. I mean, seriously, she continued, gesturing around at all the stuff I'd carefully arranged. This whole setup screams desperation. It's like someone watched too many movies and thought they could buy their way into being romantic. That's when she walked over to me, her heels clicking on the rooftop tiles like a countdown timer. I thought maybe she was going to whisper something, apologize for being harsh, tell me she was just overwhelmed by everything. Instead, she pulled back and slapped me so hard my ears rang. The sound echoed across the rooftop like a gunshot. Then came the laughter, not from everyone, but from enough people to make it feel like the whole world was pointing and laughing at the guy who'd tried too hard and failed spectacularly. Her sister Bianca had this smirk on her face like she'd been waiting for this moment all night. Her mom just shook her head with disappointment, like I was some kid who'd broken something valuable. I could have said something, could have defended myself, pointed out everything I'd done, made a scene right back. But what was the point? Standing there with my face burning and my pride in pieces, I realized something that probably should have been obvious way earlier. You can't make someone love you by throwing money at them, and you definitely can't fix a broken relationship with fancy parties. So I did the only thing that made sense. I straightened my jacket, looked around at all those faces staring at me like I was some kind of circus act, and walked away without saying a word. Not to Delilah, not to anyone. I just left my own girlfriend's birthday party like a ghost dissolving into the night. That same night, while she was probably still up there celebrating my humiliation, I packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases, grabbed my external hard drives with all my work files, cleaned out my savings account, and drove out of town. I didn't leave a note, didn't make any dramatic goodbye calls. I just vanished from their lives like I'd never existed in the first place. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's disappearing so completely that they realize what they lost only after it's way too late to get it back. You ever just drive until you run out of gas, both literally and figuratively? That's exactly what I did. 3 days of white-knuckling the steering wheel, surviving on gas station coffee, and those nasty convenience store burritos that taste like cardboard wrapped in disappointment. I kept driving west until I hit Oregon, where the rain falls like it's got nothing better to do and nobody asks too many questions about why you showed up with everything you own crammed into the back of a Honda Civic. The name change wasn't some elaborate spy movie thing. It was surprisingly simple, actually. Damon Cross. Had a nice ring to it, didn't it? Strong but not flashy, memorable but not suspicious. I picked it because it sounded like someone who could disappear into a crowd but still get things done when it mattered. Plus, getting new documents isn't as hard as you'd think when you know the right people and have cash in hand. Turns out there's a whole underground economy of folks who specialize in helping people start over, no questions asked. I ended up in this little town called Cedar Falls, population maybe 8,000 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone waves at strangers, and the biggest excitement is when they change the flavor of the month at the ice cream shop. Found myself a tiny apartment above this old bookstore called Frederick's Literary Haven. The place smelled like old paper and coffee, with creaky wooden floors that announced your every move. Frederick himself was this sweet old dude, probably pushing 70, with wild Einstein hair and glasses held together with electrical tape. Guy had more books crammed into that store than most libraries, stacked floor to ceiling in no particular order that made sense to anyone but him. He rented me the upstairs space for next to nothing, just $400 a month, utilities included. When I handed him the first month's rent in cash, he just nodded and said, "We all got our reasons for needing a fresh start, son. Long as you don't burn the place down or blast music after 10, we'll get along just fine." That man never asked me a single personal question in all the time I lived there. Not where I came from, not why I paid everything in cash, not why someone my age was content living above a dusty bookstore in the middle of nowhere. He'd just make me coffee in the mornings and recommend books he thought I'd like. Sometimes we'd sit on the front porch in the evenings, him reading his newspaper and me staring out at the mountains, both of us comfortable with the silence. But I wasn't planning on staying comfortable forever. See, I had this burning need to prove something, to myself, to Delilah, to everyone who'd laughed that night on the rooftop. During the day, I took whatever work I could find. Construction mostly. Roofing jobs that left my back screaming and my hands raw. Electrical work that required crawling through attics that felt like ovens in the summer. Moving jobs where I'd haul people's entire lives from one place to another, thinking about how I'd done the same thing with my own life. Except I was moving away from everything instead of towards something new. The work was hard, but it was honest, and more importantly, it was anonymous. Nobody cares about your backstory when you're up on a roof hammering shingles or running wire through walls. They just care that you show up on time, work hard, and don't steal their tools. I was good at all three, so word got around that Damon Cross was reliable. That meant steady work, steady money, and steady progress toward whatever the hell I was building. But the real work happened at night. After 10 hours of manual labor, when my muscles were screaming and most normal people would be crashing in front of the TV, I'd crack open my laptop and dive into the world I'd left behind. Finance, coding, digital marketing, all the stuff I'd dabbled in before but never taken seriously. Now it was my lifeline, my ticket to something bigger than just getting by. I started small, watching YouTube videos about cryptocurrency and reading every finance blog I could find. Lost my shirt on some stupid altcoin investment in month 3, dropped $2,000 on something called Moondoge that crashed harder than my relationship with Delilah. Got scammed by some fake trading platform that took another $1,500 before I realized what was happening. But you know what? Every failure taught me something. Every mistake made me smarter, more careful, more determined. By year 2, I wasn't just learning anymore, I was earning. Started flipping houses, buying these rundown properties that nobody wanted and turning them into something people would actually want to live in. Nothing fancy, just solid work that added value. I'd buy a place for $30,000, put in another $20,000 in materials and sweat equity, and sell it for $60,000. Simple math, steady profits. The crypto thing finally started paying off too, once I stopped chasing get-rich-quick schemes and started treating it like actual investing. Set up shell companies to keep everything clean and legal, diversified my portfolio, played the long game instead of trying to hit home runs every time. Turns out patience and discipline beat gambling every single time. By year 4, I was the silent partner behind 2 online consulting firms. Never showed my face, never used my real name, but I was the guy making the strategies that turned failing businesses into success stories. Companies would hire my firms to fix their marketing, streamline their operations, boost their profits. They'd never know that the mastermind behind their turnaround was some guy living above a bookstore in Oregon, but that was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't exist on paper anymore. Silas Ward was a ghost, a memory that probably only lived in Delilah's mind when she was feeling nostalgic or guilty. But Damon Cross? That guy was building something real, something that mattered, something that nobody could take away with a slap and some cruel laughter. For years of disappeared felt like a lifetime, but also like I was just getting started. You know that moment when you're cruising along, thinking you've finally got life figured out, and then the universe decides to remind you that you're not the one writing the script? That's exactly what happened on a Tuesday morning in March, for years after I'd vanished into thin air. I was sitting in Frederick's bookstore, nursing my second cup of coffee and reading some financial reports on my laptop, when he shuffled over with this weird look on his face. The old man had this stack of mail in his hands, but he was holding one envelope like it might explode if he breathed on it wrong. "This came for you," he said, setting it down on the table next to my coffee mug. "Came to the P.O. box, but there's something off about it." I looked at the envelope and immediately felt this cold sensation creep up my spine. The thing was expensive, thick, cream-colored paper that probably cost more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. My alias was written across the front in this perfect calligraphy that looked like it came from some fancy wedding invitation. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. There was no return address. No postmark. No stamp. Nothing. How'd this get to the post office without a stamp? I asked Frederick, but he just shrugged and walked away, muttering something about how the postal service wasn't what it used to be. I sat there staring at this thing for probably 10 minutes, turning it over in my hands like I was handling evidence from a crime scene. See, when you've spent 4 years building a completely anonymous life, when you've been more careful than a paranoid drug dealer about keeping your tracks covered, you get real suspicious when mysterious letters show up with your fake name on them, especially when they arrive through channels that don't make any logical sense. I finally worked up the nerve to open it, using my coffee shop knife to slice through the wax seal. Yeah, there was an actual wax seal, like we were living in some Victorian novel or something. Inside was this single sheet of paper, same expensive stock as the envelope, with maybe 50 words printed in that same perfect calligraphy. "Mr. Cross," it read, "your reputation in certain circles has not gone unnoticed. We cordially invite you to attend an exclusive summit for emerging global investors. Location, the Grandview Resort, Riverview. Date, March 20th to 22nd. Your participation would be valued. Accommodations have been arranged. Simply present this invitation upon arrival. That was it. No signature, no organization name, no contact information. Just this cryptic invitation to some high-roller meeting in my old hometown, happening on the exact same weekend as Delilah's birthday. My hands started shaking, and not from the caffeine. Riverview. The place I'd fled from 4 years ago with my tail between my legs and my heart shattered into a million pieces. The place where I'd been humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to Delilah, where I'd learned the hard way that love doesn't mean squat when someone decides you're not worth their respect. The place I'd sworn I'd never set foot in again, no matter what. But here's the thing about the universe. It's got this sixth sense of timing. March 20th was Delilah's 37th birthday. The weekend of the 22nd would be right around the anniversary of that disaster on the rooftop, when my whole world had come crashing down over some imported wine and a custom cake. I read the invitation probably 20 times, looking for clues, trying to figure out who could possibly know about Damon Cross and his reputation in certain circles. I'd been so careful, so methodical about keeping my business dealings anonymous. My shell companies were registered in different states. My consulting work was done through encrypted channels. My real estate flips were handled through intermediaries who'd never met me face to face. But someone knew. Someone had connected the dots between the nobody who'd disappeared from Riverview and the somebody who was quietly making waves in the investment world. Someone with enough resources to track me down, enough influence to get an unstamped letter delivered to my P.O. box, and enough nerve to invite me back to the scene of my greatest humiliation. The more I thought about it, the more that old familiar chill settled into my bones. It was the same feeling I'd had that night on the rooftop, right before everything went sideways. Like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, not knowing if the next step would be solid ground or a 1,000-foot drop. I spent the rest of that day pacing around the bookstore, driving Frederick crazy with my restless energy. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to throw the invitation in the fireplace and pretend it never happened. I'd built a good life in Oregon. Quiet, successful, drama-free. Why risk all of that by walking back into whatever web someone was spinning for me? But there was this other voice, the one that had been whispering in the back of my mind for 4 years. The voice that wondered what had happened to everyone I'd left behind. The voice that wanted to know if Delilah ever thought about me, if she ever regretted that night, if she'd figured out what she'd thrown away when she decided I wasn't worth her gratitude. That night, I made a decision that probably would have seemed crazy to anyone who knew the whole story. I booked a flight to Riverview under yet another name, Roman Bishop this time. Got myself a whole new set of documents, a credit card that traced back to one of my shell companies, even had a fake business card printed up that identified me as a private investment consultant. But here's the thing, I wasn't going back for closure. I wasn't going back to win Delilah back or to get revenge on the people who'd laughed at me. I was going back because someone had gone to a lot of trouble to get my attention, and I needed to know why. In my experience, when mysterious people start sending mysterious invitations, it usually means someone knows something you need to know. The flight was booked for March 19th, one day before Delilah's birthday, 4 years after the worst night of my life. Time to find out what the hell was really going on. You know that feeling when you step off a plane and breathe in the air of a place you swore you'd never see again? It hits you like a punch to the gut, all those memories flooding back whether you want them or not. The Riverview Airport smelled exactly the same. That weird mix of industrial cleaning supplies and overpriced coffee that somehow managed to be both sterile and comforting at the same time. I was walking through the terminal, pulling my carry-on behind me and trying to blend in with all the other business travelers, when I spotted him. Maxwell Lynn, standing by the baggage claim like he'd been waiting there for hours, holding a folded newspaper and wearing that same expensive suit he'd probably been buying in different colors for the past decade. Now, seeing Maxwell there wasn't just surprising, it was downright unsettling. This was a guy I'd met exactly once, maybe 4.5 years ago, at some networking event Delilah had dragged me to. He was one of those smooth-talking investor types who made his money by convincing other people to give him their money, you know? The kind of guy who drives a BMW he can't really afford and name-drops celebrities he's never actually met. I remembered him because I tried to warn Delilah about him afterward. Told her the guy gave me bad vibes. that something about his whole operation seemed sketchy. She'd laughed it off, said I was just being paranoid because I didn't understand sophisticated finance. Yeah, well, turns out my paranoia radar was pretty well calibrated. But what the hell was he doing at the airport, and how did he know I was going to be on that particular flight? I was traveling under the name Roman Bishop, for crying out loud. Unless someone had serious connections or serious surveillance capabilities, there was no way he should have been able to track me down. He spotted me before I could decide whether to approach him or just walk past like I didn't recognize him. Our eyes met across the terminal, and he gave me this weird little nod before walking over with purpose. The guy looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, like the past few years hadn't been particularly kind to him. Roman Bishop, he said when he got close enough, using my fake name like we were old buddies. Or should I say Damon Cross? Or maybe you prefer your original name, Silas Ward. My blood went cold. This guy knew all my identities, which meant either he was working for someone with serious resources, or he'd been tracking me a lot longer than I'd realized. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was running through escape routes and worst-case scenarios. I think you've got me confused with someone else, I said, but he just smiled and shook his head. Cut the crap, he said, pulling out that folded newspaper he'd been carrying. You need to see this. Trust me, you're going to want to sit down first. He handed me the paper. It was the Riverview Herald, dated just 2 days earlier. But it wasn't the date that made my knees go weak. It was the headline screaming across the front page in bold black letters. Local entrepreneur arrested in $7.6 million investor scam. And there, right below that headline, was a picture that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Delilah. My Delilah. Except she looked nothing like the confident, put-together woman who'd slapped me on that rooftop 4 years ago. This version of her was in handcuffs, being led away by federal agents. Her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled, like she'd been crying for hours. I stared at that picture for probably 30 seconds before I could even process the words underneath it. The article talked about how Delilah Ward and her business partner, some guy named Jeremy Kane, had been running a fake equity firm called Trinity Investment Solutions. They'd been taking money from investors, promising huge returns on some revolutionary tech startup that didn't actually exist. Classic Ponzi scheme stuff, except they'd gotten greedy and sloppy, and the whole thing had collapsed when too many people started asking for their money back at the same time. But here's the part that made my hands start shaking. According to the article, when the feds came knocking, Delilah had tried to pin the whole thing on his silent partner, who'd helped design the scam before disappearing with a chunk of the money. And the name she gave them? Silas Ward, her ex-boyfriend who'd mysteriously vanished years earlier. She's trying to frame you, Maxwell said, watching my face as I read through the article. Told investigators you were the mastermind, that you'd convinced her to start the fake company before cutting and running when things got hot. She's claiming you took $2 million with you when you disappeared. I felt like I was going to throw up. Took me about 6 months of digging to figure out that Delilah Ward is a world-class con artist who's been using your name and reputation to legitimize her scams. But the feds don't know that. They're looking for Silas Ward, and when they find him, they're going to arrest him for fraud, money laundering, and about a dozen other federal crimes. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of what looked like a federal wanted poster. There was my old driver's license photo, probably pulled from some DMV database, with wanted for questioning printed underneath it in official-looking letters. So here's the thing, Maxwell continued, putting his phone away. I didn't track you down to turn you in. I tracked you down because we both got screwed by the same person, and I figure maybe we can help each other out. You need to clear your name before the feds catch up to you, and I need to get my money back from that psychotic bitch who stole it. Standing there in that airport terminal, holding a newspaper with my ex-girlfriend's mugshot on the front page and listening to a guy I barely knew explain how my life was about to get turned upside down again, I realized something important. Disappearing hadn't been enough. Building a new life hadn't been enough. As long as Delilah Ward was still breathing, she was going to keep finding ways to poison everything I touched. Time to stop running and start fighting back. You know what they say about the best-laid plans? Well, turns out 4 years of paranoid preparation actually pays off when your psycho ex-girlfriend tries to frame you for federal crimes. See, I'm the kind of guy who plans for worst-case scenarios, and getting blamed for someone else's criminal stupidity definitely qualified as a worst-case scenario. The moment I left Maxwell at that airport, I was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game Delilah thought she was playing. I'd spent years building multiple identities, creating paper trails that could exonerate me, and keeping meticulous records of every business deal I'd ever made. Call it paranoia, call it smart planning. I called it my "oh shit" insurance policy, and it was about to pay dividends. First stop was my hotel room, where I fired up my encrypted laptop and accessed the digital fortress I'd built around my real identity. For years of careful documentation, every financial transaction logged and verified, every business relationship mapped out with contracts and communications. I had bank records showing exactly where my money came from and where it went. I had timestamps proving I was in Oregon during every single month that Delilah's scam was running. I had business partners who could verify my legitimate consulting work, real estate deals with public records, and a paper trail longer than most people's grocery lists. But having the evidence wasn't enough. I needed to get it in front of the right people before the federal investigation turned me into a fugitive. That's where my network came in handy. For years of flying under the radar had taught me the value of building relationships with people who could move mountains when necessary. Within 6 hours of reading that newspaper, I had lawyers in 3 different states reviewing my documentation. Not just any lawyers, the kind of high-powered defense attorneys who charge more per hour than most people make in a week and who know exactly how to make federal prosecutors listen when someone's been falsely accused. I paid them in cryptocurrency, naturally, keeping everything clean and traceable, but not necessarily tied to any particular identity. While the legal team was building my defense, I was working on the offensive strategy. See, Delilah had made one crucial mistake when she decided to drag my name through the mud. She'd underestimated exactly how connected I'd become in the 4 years since I'd disappeared. The anonymous consulting work I'd been doing hadn't just made me money, it had made me friends in very influential places. I reached out to contacts in the investment community, people who'd benefited from my strategies without ever knowing my real name. Turned out a lot of them were very interested to learn that the mysterious consultant who'd helped them make millions was the same guy getting falsely accused in the Riverview Herald. Amazing how quickly people are willing to provide character references when you've made them rich. But the real game changer was Ray Patel. She was this investigative reporter I'd helped out about 2 years earlier when she was working on a story about cryptocurrency fraud. I'd provided her with some inside information that helped her break a major story about a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly investors. She'd promised me a favor if I ever needed one, and brother, I was ready to cash in that favor. I called Ray from a burner phone, using a voice modulator app that made me sound like someone else entirely. Told her I had an exclusive story about the Delilah Ward case that would blow her mind. Within an hour, I'd sent her an encrypted file containing everything. The real timeline of my disappearance, documentation of my legitimate business activities, proof that I'd been building companies while Delilah was building scams, and most importantly, evidence that she'd been using my name and reputation to legitimize her con games long before the Fed showed up. Ray was a pit bull when she smelled a good story, and this story had everything. False accusations, corporate fraud, a mysterious businessman who'd built an empire while living under an assumed name, and a twisted ex-girlfriend trying to frame her innocent former lover for crimes he'd never committed. She worked around the clock for 36 hours straight, fact-checking every detail, interviewing sources, and building a narrative that would completely flip the script on the federal investigation. The article dropped online at exactly 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and by noon it was trending on every social media platform. The Ghost Builder, from silence to empire, read like something out of a thriller novel, except every word was backed up by documentation that would make any prosecutor think twice about pursuing charges. Ray had done more than just clear my name. She'd turned me into a folk hero. The article painted me as this brilliant entrepreneur who'd rebuilt himself from nothing after being publicly humiliated by a narcissistic girlfriend, only to have that same girlfriend try to destroy him again years later when her own criminal schemes collapsed. It was David versus Goliath, except David had 4 years to prepare and Goliath was a delusional con artist who'd finally run out of people to scam. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for the mystery businessman who'd been wrongfully accused. Financial news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like, "How One Man's Silent Success Story Exposed a Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud." Delilah went from being portrayed as a victim of her manipulative ex-boyfriend to being exposed as a pathological liar who'd been trading on stolen reputation for years. But the real victory came when the federal prosecutors issued a statement 3 days after Rhee's article went viral. They'd reviewed the new evidence and determined that Silas Ward was not a person of interest in the Trinity Investment Solutions case. In fact, they were now investigating how Delilah Ward had obtained and misused his personal information as part of her fraudulent scheme. Maxwell called me that night, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Holy shit, man," he said. "You didn't just clear your name, you buried her. The feds are talking about adding identity theft and defamation to her charges." She went from looking at 5 years to looking at 15. I didn't celebrate, though. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Delilah had spent 4 years thinking she could use my name whenever it was convenient for her schemes, never considering that someday I might be in a position to defend myself. She'd underestimated the man I'd become, and that underestimation was going to cost her everything. Standing in my hotel room that night, reading the flood of supportive messages from people who'd never met me but believed in my story, I realized something important. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't hiding from my past. I was using it as a foundation for whatever came next. Delilah had tried to bury me, but all she'd done was help me dig myself out of a grave I'd been hiding in for way too long. You know that moment in movies when the mysterious stranger walks into the room and everything goes quiet? Well, real life isn't quite that dramatic, but it's pretty damn close when you've spent the last week becoming a viral sensation and then show up unannounced at the most exclusive event in town. The Grandview Resort's annual charity gala was exactly the kind of pretentious affair I used to feel intimidated by back in my old life. 500 of Riverview's wealthiest and most influential people, all dressed to the nines and pretending to care about whatever cause was fashionable this year. The kind of event where a single table cost more than most people's monthly rent, and where being seen was more important than actually seeing anything. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. Charcoal gray Armani suit, no tie, crisp white shirt open at the collar. The platinum Rolex I'd bought myself after my first $1 million real estate flip caught the light perfectly as I handed my keys to the valet. I looked like money, but not the desperate, trying too hard kind of money I used to project. This was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've earned every dollar and don't need to prove anything to anyone. Walking through those massive oak doors felt like stepping back in time. Except I wasn't the same man who'd left this world 4 years ago. That guy had been desperate for acceptance, hungry for validation, willing to bankrupt himself trying to impress people who didn't deserve his effort. This version of me? I was here because I wanted to be, not because I needed anything from anyone in that room. The main ballroom was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen with centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's cars. The usual suspects were all there, working the room like it was their job. Politicians pressing flesh, business owners making deals, socialites gossiping about who was sleeping with whom and who'd lost money on what stupid investment. I didn't announce myself, didn't make a grand entrance, or try to command attention. I just moved through the crowd like smoke, present but not pushy, visible but not desperate to be seen. Amazing how differently people treat you when you're not trying to sell them something or beg for their approval. It took maybe 20 minutes before I spotted her. Delilah was holding court near the bar, surrounded by the same circle of sycophants who'd laughed when she slapped me on that rooftop. She was wearing this stunning black dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hair done up in some elaborate style that screamed, "I spent 6 hours at the salon today." From a distance, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But I could see the cracks if I looked closely enough. The way her smile seemed forced, like she was working too hard to appear confident. The slight tremor in her hands when she lifted her wine glass. The way her eyes kept darting around the room, like she was expecting bad news to walk through the door at any moment. Which, in a way, it just had. Jeremy Kane was standing next to her, playing the part of the supportive boyfriend with his hand resting possessively on her lower back. I recognized him from the newspaper photos, tall, artificially tanned, with the kind of perfect teeth that screamed, "Trust fund baby." He was working the crowd like a seasoned politician, shaking hands and making small talk with people who probably had no idea they were chatting with an accused federal criminal. I made my way toward the bar, taking my time, letting them notice me gradually. First it was just another face in the crowd, then recognition starting to dawn, then that moment of pure shock when reality hit them like a freight train. Our eyes met across maybe 15 feet of crowded dance floor, and time just stopped. Not in a romantic movie way, more like watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Delilah's face went through about 6 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, fear, anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief. That's when she dropped her wine glass. The sound of crystal hitting marble was sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of conversation and music. Red wine splashed across the white linen tablecloth like blood at a crime scene, and suddenly everyone in a 10-foot radius was staring at the mess. Delilah just stood there, frozen, staring at me like I was some kind of ghost who'd materialized out of her worst nightmare. Jeremy noticed the commotion and followed her gaze, his confident smile faltering when he realized what, or rather who, had caused his girlfriend to lose her composure. The guy actually took a step backward, like I was contagious or something. Smart move, considering his legal situation. I could have said something. Could have walked over and made a scene. Let everyone know that the mysterious businessman from the viral news story was standing right there in their midst. Could have confronted Delilah about her attempts to frame me, or called Jeremy out for being part of a multi-million-dollar scam. Instead, I just nodded. One small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. That yes, I saw her. Yes, I was really there. And yes, everything had changed since the last time we'd been in the same room. That nod said everything that needed to be said. It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge or any of the dramatic emotions that probably would have driven the old me. It was about power, the quiet, unshakable kind of power that comes from knowing you've already won before the game even started. Jeremy reached for Delilah's arm, probably trying to offer comfort or support or whatever it is that criminals do when they're trying to maintain their cover. But she pushed his hand away without even looking at him, her eyes still locked on mine like she was trying to figure out if I was real or just some stress-induced hallucination. I finished my drink, top-shelf whiskey, neat, because I could afford the good stuff now, and set the empty glass on the bar. Then I walked away, moving through the crowd like I owned the place, which in a way, I guess I did. Not literally, but in terms of presence, confidence, and the kind of quiet authority that money and success tend to generate. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. The message had been delivered, loud and clear. Silas Ward was back, but he wasn't the same man who'd left. This version was stronger, smarter, and completely immune to whatever games Delilah might still be trying to play. Let her spend the rest of the evening wondering what I was planning, what I knew, and what I might do next. After 4 years of her thinking she held all the cards, it was time for her to realize that the deck had been reshuffled, and I was the one dealing now. You ever have someone from your past show up at your door looking like they've been hit by a freight train? Well, that's exactly what happened 2 nights after the gala. And let me tell you, it was both exactly what I expected and nothing like I'd imagined it would be. I was sitting in my hotel suite. Penthouse level at the Meridian, same building where I'd thrown that disastrous birthday party 4 years ago, working on my laptop and enjoying the irony of being able to afford the best room in the place. The view was incredible. The whole city spread out below me like a circuit board, all those lights twinkling in the darkness. It was the kind of view that used to make me feel small and insignificant, but now it just reminded me how far I'd climbed. The knock came at exactly 11:47 p.m. Not the confident rap of a hotel employee or the authoritative pound of law enforcement. This was hesitant, desperate, the kind of knock that says, "Please don't pretend you're not in there." I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole, but I looked anyway, just to see what 4 years and a federal fraud investigation had done to the woman who'd once been the center of my universe. Holy shit. Delilah looked like she'd been crying for hours, maybe days. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and she was wearing this rumpled designer dress that looked like she'd been sleeping in it. This wasn't the confident, put-together woman who'd slapped me in front of 20 people. This was someone who'd hit rock bottom and was still falling. I could have ignored her. Could have pretended I wasn't there. Let her stand in that hallway until hotel security showed up to escort her away. Part of me, the part that still remembered the humiliation, the laughter, the way she'd thrown my love back in my face, wanted to let her suffer the way she'd made me suffer. But I'm not that guy anymore. The man I'd become over the past 4 years didn't operate from a place of petty revenge. So I opened the door. "Silas," she said, and just hearing my real name from her lips after all this time hit me harder than I'd expected. "Please, I know I don't deserve this, but I need to talk to you." I didn't say anything, just stepped back and let her walk into the suite. She moved like she was afraid I might change my mind and throw her out, which honestly wasn't entirely wrong. The woman who destroyed my self-worth in front of a crowd was now standing in my penthouse suite, begging for my attention. The first thing I did was pour her a glass of water. Not wine, not champagne, just plain water from the mini fridge. She needed to hydrate more than she needed to get drunk, and besides, I wasn't about to waste good alcohol on whatever sob story she was about to feed me. She took the glass with shaking hands and drank about half of it before she could even speak. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were so red and swollen I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Jeremy turned on me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The federal prosecutors offered him a deal if he'd testify against me. He took it. Said I was the mastermind, that he was just following my lead, that I'd manipulated him into helping with the scam." I wasn't surprised. Guys like Jeremy Kane don't have loyalty in their DNA. They've got survival instincts and a willingness to throw anyone under the bus if it saves their own skin. Delilah should have seen that coming from a mile away. But then again, she'd never been great at reading people's true motivations. "I don't know who else to turn to," she continued. And then she did something that 4 years ago would have broken my heart. She dropped to her knees right there on the carpet of my hotel suite. "I know I hurt you. I know I was horrible to you that night. And I know I don't deserve your help. But please, Silas. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The tears started then. Real tears, not the crocodile tears she used to turn on whenever she wanted something. These were the tears of someone who'd finally realized that all the bridges they'd burned were the only ways back to safety. I let her cry for maybe 5 minutes, just standing there watching this woman who'd once made me feel like I wasn't worth the air I breathed, reduced to begging on my hotel room floor. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of vindication or justice served. Just this hollow feeling, like watching a house burn down when you used to live there. When she finally looked up at me, mascara streaking down her cheeks, I told her the truth. Not the angry truth, not the bitter truth, but the simple, honest truth that had taken me 4 years to fully understand. "Delilah," I said, sitting down across from her, "I'm not angry at you anymore. I was, for a long time, but I'm not now. You know why? Because being angry at you is like being angry at a scorpion for stinging. It's just what you do. It's who you are." She started to protest, to say she'd changed, that she was different now, but I held up my hand to stop her. "The thing is," I continued, "I don't care anymore. Not about your legal troubles, not about Jeremy, not about whatever mess you've gotten yourself into this time. You didn't just lose me when you slapped me that night. You lost access to me. And that's something you'll never get back." I could see the exact moment when she realized I meant it. Her face went through this progression of emotions: hope, desperation, disbelief, and finally acceptance. She wasn't going to manipulate me, wasn't going to guilt me into helping her, wasn't going to charm her way back into my life. "You're really not going to help me?" she asked, and there was genuine surprise in her voice, like she couldn't believe someone would turn down the opportunity to rescue her. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, standing up and walking to the door. "But I'm not going to save you either. You made your choices, Delilah. Now you get to live with them." I opened the door and waited. She stood up slowly, smoothed down her dress, and tried to pull herself together. For just a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with. Proud, beautiful, unbreakable. Then reality crashed back in, and she was just another person who'd burned too many bridges and run out of places to hide. She walked to the door, paused for a second like she was going to say something else, then thought better of it. The last thing she said to me was, "I really did love you, you know. In my own way." "I know," I replied. "But your way wasn't enough." She walked out without another word, and I closed the door behind her. I didn't watch her walk down the hallway, didn't wonder where she was going or what she'd do next. That chapter of my life was finally, completely closed. You know what they say about the best revenge being success? Well, standing on that conference stage in front of 300 of the most powerful investors in the country, I finally understood what that actually meant. This wasn't about getting back at anyone. This was about showing the world who I'd become when nobody was watching. The Global Investment Summit was exactly the kind of high-level event I used to dream about attending back when I was scraping together pennies to impress Delilah. Now I was the keynote speaker, the guy everyone had come to hear from. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was happening in the same city where I'd once been humiliated, in front of people who probably remembered the pathetic story about Delilah Ward's ex-boyfriend who'd disappeared after making a scene. I'd been introduced as the enigmatic strategist behind some of this decade's most successful anonymous investment firms, which was a fancy way of saying the guy who got rich while staying invisible. The audience was paying attention before I even opened my mouth. Cell phones were tucked away, conversations had stopped, and every eye in that ballroom was focused on the stage. I started simple, no flashy opening or attention-grabbing gimmicks. Just me, a wireless mic, and the truth I'd learned over 4 years of rebuilding my life from scratch. 4 years ago, I said, letting my voice carry across the silent room, I disappeared. Not because I wanted to hide from the world, but because I needed to figure out who I was when nobody else was watching. When there was no audience to perform for, no approval to chase, no expectations to meet except my own. I could see people in the audience shifting forward in their seats. This wasn't the typical corporate motivational speech they were expecting. This was something more personal, more real. Most of you probably know the headlines by now, I continued. The false accusations, the attempt to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, the ex-girlfriend who tried to use my name to legitimize her scams. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. None of that matters. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not even the vindication when the truth came out. I paused, looking out over the crowd. I could see some familiar faces, investors who'd unknowingly hired my consulting firms, business owners who'd benefited from my strategies, even a few people I recognized from my old life in Riverview. They were all hanging on every word. What matters is what you build when nobody's applauding. Real power isn't about being seen, it's about being effective. It's about creating value when there's no crowd to cheer, solving problems when there's no credit to claim, building something meaningful when the only person who'll know you did it is you. The energy in the room was electric now. I could feel it, that moment when an audience stops just listening and starts really hearing what you're saying. I spent 4 years learning that healing doesn't come from revenge or vindication or proving other people wrong. It comes from outgrowing the need for those things. It comes from building something so solid, so real, so valuable that the opinions of people who hurt you become irrelevant background noise. I talked about the construction jobs that taught me the value of honest work, the failed investments that taught me humility, the successful deals that taught me patience. I talked about learning to find satisfaction in quiet accomplishments, about building wealth without building ego, about creating success that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or recognition. The woman who tried to frame me is facing federal charges not because I sought revenge, but because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. The partner who betrayed her did so not because I manipulated him, but because loyalty built on fraud isn't really loyalty at all. I didn't destroy their lives. They destroyed their own lives, and I just happened to be standing far enough away that the debris didn't hit me. By the time I reached my conclusion, the room was completely silent except for my voice. Success isn't about proving you were right all along. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. I stepped back from the microphone, and for about 3 seconds, you could have heard a pin drop. Then the applause started, not polite conference applause, but the kind of sustained ovation that makes you understand why people chase public speaking as a career. But here's the thing, I didn't smile. I didn't wave or bow or do any of the theatrical stuff that speakers usually do. I just nodded once, the same way I'd nodded at Delilah in the gala, and walked off that stage with my head high. I could see Jeremy in the audience, sitting alone near the back, looking like he wished he could disappear into his chair. I could see some of Delilah's old friends, the ones who'd laughed when she slapped me, now looking at me with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. But I didn't stop to savor their discomfort. I'd said what I came to say, and now I was done. You know what's funny about courtrooms? They're supposed to be these intimidating places where justice gets served. But when you're sitting in the gallery watching someone you used to love get what they deserve, it just feels like watching a really sad movie that you already know the ending to. Delilah's trial lasted 3 weeks, and I showed up for exactly one day. The day her lawyer decided to throw a Hail Mary and try to pin everything on me. Again, some people never learn, I guess. She looked different in that defendant's chair. Smaller somehow, like the weight of her lies had finally crushed whatever was left of the confident woman who used to command every room she walked into. Her lawyer, some overpriced shark in a $1,000 suit, had obviously convinced her that playing the victim card was her only shot at avoiding serious prison time. "Your Honor," the guy said, gesturing dramatically toward where I was sitting, "my client was manipulated by a master manipulator. Silas Ward abandoned her when she needed him most, leaving her vulnerable to the influence of Jeremy Kane. The psychological trauma of that abandonment led directly to the poor decisions that brought us here today." I almost laughed. 4 years later, and she was still trying to make everything my fault. Still trying to convince people that her criminal behavior was somehow a result of my abandonment, like I'd forced her to steal $7.5 million from innocent investors. But Judge Morrison had already done his homework. The guy was in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from 20 years of listening to criminals make excuses for their behavior. "Counselor," he said, cutting off Delilah's lawyer mid-sentence, "Mr. Ward is not on trial here. He is not part of this case. The evidence clearly shows that he had no involvement in Trinity Investment Solutions, no knowledge of the fraudulent activity, and no contact with your client during the time period in question." That was it. The final nail in the coffin of Delilah's last desperate attempt to drag me down with her. The judge's words weren't just a legal ruling. They were an official declaration that I was innocent, that I'd never been anything but innocent, and that her attempts to frame me were exactly what they appeared to be, the desperate lies of a caught criminal. Jeremy had already flipped, of course. Took a plea deal that got him 5 years in exchange for testifying against Delilah. The guy couldn't get to the witness stand fast enough, spilling every detail about how she'd masterminded the whole thing, how she'd used my name and reputation to attract investors, how she'd convinced him that stealing millions was somehow justified because her ex-boyfriend had traumatized her. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. 6 years in federal prison, plus restitution to the victims. I watched Delilah's face when the verdict came down, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely shocked that her charm and manipulation hadn't saved her. I left the courthouse without talking to anyone, but apparently word got around that I'd been there. 3 months later, I got an email from Bianca, Delilah's sister. Subject line: "She still loves you." The message was short. "Delilah asked me to tell you she's sorry for everything. She says she still loves you and hopes someday you can forgive her. She's getting the help she needs now." I stared at that email for maybe 30 seconds, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness wasn't something Delilah got to ask for through her sister. And love? Real love doesn't try to destroy the person it claims to care about when things get difficult. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ashes. You know what real closure looks like? It's not dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. It's building something meaningful with your own hands and watching it change people's lives for the better. A year after Delilah's sentencing, I did something that would have seemed impossible to the broken man who'd fled Riverview with his tail between his legs. I came back home to build something permanent. The Ward Center for Resilient Youth wasn't some vanity project or guilt-driven charity case. It was a state-of-the-art facility designed to help kids who'd been written off by everyone else. Foster kids aging out of the system, teenagers from broken homes, young people who'd made mistakes but still deserved a second chance. I funded the whole thing myself, every brick and beam, every computer and counseling session. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was packed with local politicians, business leaders, and families whose kids would benefit from the center's programs. Standing there with those oversized scissors in my hands, looking out at a crowd that included some of the same people who'd witnessed my humiliation years earlier, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine pride that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. That's when a kid from the crowd, maybe 13 or 14, with the kind of wary eyes that come from seeing too much too young, raised his hand and asked, "Are you the man who came back stronger?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. This kid didn't know about Delilah or the rooftop or any of the drama that had defined my old life. To him, I was just the guy who'd built something good, someone who'd figured out how to turn pain into purpose. I smiled, really smiled, probably for the first time in years. I'm the man who learned to disappear without losing himself. The local news covered the opening, but they barely mentioned the old scandal. Delilah's name had already faded from the headlines, replaced by newer stories about different criminals and fresher controversies. The reporters were more interested in the anonymous businessman who'd quietly built an empire and then used his wealth to give back to his community. Meanwhile, my name, my real name, was being engraved on plaques in boardrooms across the country. The consulting firms I'd built were thriving. The investment strategies I'd developed were being taught in business schools. The kid who'd been slapped and humiliated on a rooftop had become someone whose opinion actually mattered in rooms where real decisions got made. Sometimes I still think about that night, the imported wine, the custom cake, the laughter that followed the slap. But it doesn't sting anymore. It's just a story about someone I used to be, someone who thought he needed other people's approval to have worth. The rooftop slap didn't define me. It revealed me. It showed me who I really was when everything else got stripped away, and more importantly, it showed me who I could become when I stopped trying to be what other people wanted. The silence that followed that slap, that's where I learned to listen to my own voice. And that voice told me something important. You don't need to correct the past when you've outgrown it completely.